Hello, thanks for joining us. Today we have a special interview with Israel Sibia from the Solomon Islands, or the Solomons for short. Israel's in Australia. He's come to the studio to tell his story. We'll track through the recent history of the Solomons, but I want to find out about your story and why you're here and what you'd like to see happen for you personally. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
So, how long have you been in Australia now?
So it's coming up to 3 months now.
Mhm.
So I flew over to Australia on the 25th of May,
Right.
and the Solomon Islands border was pretty much still closed, but the Australian border was open.
Right.
So I was able to leave then, keeping it really low, but
Right.
was really happy that I was able to leave.
And you're not a political refugee as such, but there was some tension there and you were looking to get away from those pressures at the time?
Yes, so I am not a political refugee per se as of yet, even though I'm looking at what are some of the possibilities of me being here, even though at the moment I am involved more with church and ministry and activities like that, which is more of what I was doing most of my adult life after being, a Christian.
Okay.
But I did leave the Solomon Islands because I was in a not too
An awkward position.
not a very good position, yes.
Mm.
And it involves politics, and it involves being a voice for the people and speaking out.
Well, let's get to that. But
Yep.
you've left your wife.
Yes.
You've had to leave your wife there to get out
Yes,
for safety reasons and to try and pursue a future, which is reasonable.
yes.
Yeah. So a few months now, so that must be difficult.
It is difficult. There has been a lot of factors contributing to me being making up my mind to leave. Part of it is COVID-19,
Yeah.
and then the pressure that comes with it that trickles down to almost every aspect of your life, which I know it's a global thing, but in
Yeah.
the Solomon Islands, when it contributes to what is happening now, it becomes a very, very huge pressure point for me and for the family. So at the moment, it's the sensible thing for me to do, to step out and leave the Solomon Islands and pursue what is ahead.
Okay, and you tell us you've been a Christian and been in ministry, and the Solomons is really, it's very evangelical, isn't it? It's very, very churched, or at least.
Yes, I think the Solomon Islands, like most of the countries in the Pacific, sort of pride themselves, in
It's part of the fabric, isn't it?
it's part of the fabric, and we pride ourselves in saying that we are a Christian region. The Solomon Islands often say that we are a Christian country, even though most people are still nominal. They live a normal life throughout the week and just on Sundays pop into church, but still Christianity and faith plays a very big role in a person's
See,
life.
it's slightly different to the Australian cultures, because we talk about the separation of church and state. But there you can't separate it. It's really just interwoven.
It is so interwoven, and it's
Which is a good thing.
it is a good thing. And you ask any Solomon Islander, chances are most of them agree that it is a good thing. Just a couple of, if you go back 1 or 2 decades ago, you go into Honiara, Sundays hardly anything is open. Things are changing now for sure, but it's still those
A bit more secular.
yes, now meaning more secularity or secularism or whatever they call it is creeping into the Solomon Islands, but still the fundamental values remains.
Well, let's talk about the change in the country, because let's go back to 2000, okay? There was a lot of civil unrest. People might be aware there was a lot of rioting, and it was not a good time in the history of the country. And around that time, there was the Townsville Peace Agreement, which followed that unrest, as I understand it. So tell us about that, because that's a key building block for where the country's going, I think.
Yes, so that was a defining moment for the Solomon Islands. Many scholars believe it goes as back as the colonial days,
Right.
but coming back to the year 2000, it's when
22 years ago. So
22 years ago, yes, it's actually a clash of different cultures and ethnic groups. Honiara being the center of development in the Solomon Islands, and as a result, you have people from the other provinces moving in and settling on Guadalcanal, as a means of finding opportunity for work and stuff like that.
So Guadalcanal is the main island, and Honiara is on Guadalcanal.
It's on Guadalcanal.
And people may know that name from the World War II battles.
Yes.
Which are being celebrated, so to speak.
Yes.
That's the main island. That's the seat of power. And
Yes.
that's where most of the infrastructure is.
Yes.
Yeah. And is that where most of the attention and investment and money is happening now?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And many of us are saying that, the government should put more effort in decentralizing development from Guadalcanal and started spreading it to islands like Malaita and Western
Because
Province.
there are a number of islands.
Oh, there are a lot of islands.
Yeah,
I think 900 islands altogether. Not all of them are inhabited, but a lot of islands. So because of the influx of people to work and settle on Guadalcanal, you have clashes of differences. People don't communicate the same language, the same culture, the way we,
The tribal
thing, and usually when you have these differences, conflicts come up, and you'd have one isolated incident that led to another isolated incident, and then over the years you have these things added up.
And people have long memories.
Long memories people do have. I know my people from Guadalcanal are like that, and yes, it has accumulated over time, and we have this event during '99 and 2000 where it just went out of control, and people died.
So let's track forward, because right now there are new discussions going on between Solomons and China, and that's causing some concern for Australia, and people have been watching that and reading about that. But in 2019, Solomons moved away from, late 2019, moved away from an arrangement with Taiwan. So we're talking about the last 22 years, but in the last 3 years, there's been a geopolitical shift as well. So that's another layer, isn't it? You've got the ethnic, tribal thing you just talked about, and that cultural history. And now you've got this geopolitical overlay. So it's a real cocktail.
It is, and many of us, I'm married to a Malaitan lady, and that in itself, I personally reflect, is a miracle, because it's more, I feel as a Christian that God is speaking to my heart as a person. You grow up learning to hate your brothers and, people who are from a different ethnicity, and then I'm feeling the call of God to head into ministry, and then all of a sudden the Lord said, well, you have to deal with this thing, and the hatred that is there, and brought along a Malaitan wife that has changed that. I am not the person I was 20 plus years ago because of that, and I think it's by God's grace. And coming back to the question of the switch and the geopolitical sense that is coming, I have seen that it is better to rally together as Solomon Islanders, regardless of which island province you come from, regardless of which ethnicity you come from. And unfortunately, there are some people who would still like to refer back to those days and allow those situations to, to control how Solomon Islanders view geopolitics today. So you
divide and conquer kind of approach.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And some of us are like, nope, we are not going to go down that path. We remain as Solomon Islanders. We rally, support together. We voice Solomon Islands' concerns.
So you're talking to the nation state and the national identity.
Yes.
And perhaps to the national destiny as well.
Yes.
What could we be? Who could we be as a nation?
Yes.
So you're having to talk to ingrained views and attitudes about cultural, factions, tribes, and geography such as islands, and that doesn't help, right? When people are living in different places.
It's just a bad place to be in, because I remember the reason why I got into trouble with the government is because I have distorted a narrative that most Guadalcanal MPs are with the national government, and they are towing the line that Guadalcanal is with China because Malaita is with the West.
Okay.
And I spoke out and said it's not an issue of ethnicity. It is an issue of this country as a nation, issues that we need to address as one people, regardless of which province you come from. And so that has I was in trouble with the government because I've distorted that narrative that Malaita is with the West and Guadalcanal is with China.
So you're talking above that. You're talking to the national identity, national identity. Well, that's a meta narrative, if you like.
Yeah.
And will go against factional interests and personal agendas.
Yeah.
So right now in the Solomons, there's a lot of money coming in from other nations, particularly China, into assets such as mining, fishing, timber, and also you were mentioning before to me off camera into grazing and farming, which is I didn't know, but there are huge resources, natural resources in the Pacific, not just in the Solomons, Vanuatu, Fiji, and so on. So there's a lot of interest, but it's also the geopolitical assets such as deep water ports that are of interest. So this is these are the issues that are causing some concern to the Australian government, Foreign Affairs and Trade. But you're talking above that, really. You're not talking specifically to the tensions therein. You're talking about who is the Solomon Islands. Am I getting that right?
Yes. Yes, and I think also my concern is when I speak Indigenous Solomon Islanders, I'm covering both Guadalcanal or whoever in the Solomon Islands who is an Indigenous Solomon Islander. There are naturalized Solomon Islanders as well, and many of them are genuine and hardworking Solomon Islanders. My concern at the moment is the primary sector of the economy should be preserved for local Solomon Islanders. And you talk about farming, you talk about and even services and things like that. Many of these things should be guarded and protected under law for Indigenous Solomon Islanders. And the issue is you have Chinese individual businesses who just walk right over everyone else.
So you're talking about the sovereignty of the land.
The sovereignty.
And the heritage and the stewardship, perhaps, rather than just selling the farm, literally.
Yes, exactly. And unfortunately, that's kind of where the Solomon Islands is heading now, is we are completely sold. That's how I see it, and it's very concerning. So people are feeling disenfranchised, therefore. I mean, exactly.
I mean, so if it's, sorry to jump in there, but what you're really saying is if the farm's being sold and the people are being disenfranchised from their cultural heritage and their land, there's no way back from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And once it's gone, it's gone.
It's gone, it's gone. And the saddest thing is many of these investors knows about this. And instead of saying, oh, I might, just hold back a bit, I might, destroy an entire ethnicity's future. No, they go in full head on, and don't care about these things. And the other sad thing is no one is saying anything about it. And
is the church quiet on this?
The church, until recently, has always been quiet. But it's good to see them coming forth. Recently, a couple of months back, they have voiced their disagreement or their opposition of the government's plan to extend the life of Parliament, which is a great start. And I wholly commend that and would like to see more of that happening going forward.
Well, it's a bit like Australia, because the church has been not too noisy here either, but there's an increasing voice, an increasing volume speaking into, because we brought the story of separation of church and state, not so much in the Solomons, but more passive perhaps in terms of the political commentary. But it's not about politics. This is about governance, stewardship, destiny. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, that's one way to see it. For me as well, it's an issue of justice, truth, and truth. And unfortunately, the nature of politics, you don't get these things. So when I do speak out, many people thought this is a political thing. For me, it's more a ministerial responsibility than it is a political.
So are you able to communicate that? Because I'm getting what you're saying. You're talking about equity, justice, truth, stewardship, governance, those sort of things, rather than the mechanics of politics.
Yes.
Right? So are people receiving that message, that meta-narrative? Are they actually understanding what you're trying to say?
Absolutely, and a big time. So a couple of months ago, my focus was not only on what I write, but I make videos, and I did those videos in Pidgin. That explains things down to the rural and even to the most, less educated person in the village.
I saw one of those Pidgin interviews. I didn't really understand it, but it sounded good.
Maybe I was speaking too fast. I need to slow down a little bit. But yes, so those videos were so powerful. I'd walk down the street in Honiara, people just walk up to me and said, "Hey, you're Israel from those videos." So when I write, you've got a targeted audience of people probably who are university graduates and high school leavers who can understand what I write. But once you started going to those videos, everyone else knows what you're talking about.
And they're very much into social media and so forth.
A lot now than it is 10 years ago or so. And
so maybe that's why you weren't so welcome. I mean, you felt you had to leave.
I felt I had to leave. It's because I was having a very unlikable impact by the government. The government doesn't like it that I'm having this impact on the general populace, and have actually come after me because I was doing this. So I have stopped making those videos, and I've limited stuff to writing. The government now, there are people working under the Prime Minister's office, many people. Their primary role is just to be on social media every day. Monitor, and not only monitor, but to counteract what many of us are saying. And part of it is discrediting who you are, tarnishing your reputation, and all of that. And that's been happening now. I was just like, it's a bit too much of an emotional and mental stress to me. And I thought, I'll slow down a bit. I can't take this anymore, But my nature, I'm wired to speak up. I will not remain silent for
That's
too
good
long.
to hear. You're not the only one. There are other people who have been standing in the gap, so to speak, especially with the deep sea port. Is it the name of the port?
Kolobangara.
Kolobangara, that's the more recent one, but the one before?
The one before was Tulagi.
Tulagi, that's right.
Yep.
There was a woman activist there. There's some guys from Latia and so on. So there's a few people who are coming forward and saying things. Do you have aspirations to be an ongoing voice in the country?
Absolutely. I want to do it, and more on a different level. I see that I have more freedom to do that here while I'm here in Australia. And I'd like to actually build on that, even though I'm a bit wise as to how I go about with that. But I'd love to do that, build the rapport, and being an impact in Australia as well as back in the Solomon Islands.
Well, that's good. Well, the country obviously needs people like that, like you. And you're not the only one, but if you can work collaboratively with other people and actually start to get a message through, it would be good. Because it needs it.
Yes.
I mean, the whole Pacific has got issues. They're all different. Solomons, Fiji, Vanuatu, and so on. But they're all little micro issues.
Yes.
So I know that the Solomons is very good in futsal, been regional champions. Still are regional champions?
I believe we are still regional champions.
What position do you play?
I'm a good spectator.
So they're very good at eating. They're very good at futsal, and they're very good at music. So there's some natural qualities. But what do you think? On a serious note, what do you think that the real destiny and the calling of the Solomons is? What's its redemptive gift? What can it bring to the great Southland of the Holy Spirit and to this region? What can it actually bring? What's its destiny?
Solomon Islands is a country that loves God. And Solomon Islands, like much of the West, is built on Judeo-Christian values.
Moral absolutes and so forth. Yep.
Yeah, and I'd love to see the Solomon Islands prosper in that regard. I'm hoping one day we could be a Singapore or Rwanda.
Yep.
It is a free country, it is a democracy, but carved out in a way that is unique to Solomon Islands.
Right.
And, you know, participate equally in the free trade and all of this. A well-educated
economic
populace.
hub for the South Pacific.
Yes,
Pacific.
it might be unrealistic at the moment, but it is a hope and
Well, it's blessed with a lot of resources. And
yes.
This is the frustration of many people when they look at the Pacific. They say, well, there's tuna and there's gold and there's copper and there's timber and there's, you know, beche de mer and there's all sorts of things, but they're not maximised, and the people still are relatively poor. The poverty level in the Solomons is one of the worst in the Pacific.
One of the lowest.
Yeah,
Yes.
and yet you look at it economically through economic lens, and you go, well, that really shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
And then you have investment coming in from other countries.
Yeah.
Australia, New Zealand, China
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And you go, well, how does that really help the people? This is the frustration of many.
Yeah.
You know, how do you distribute the wealth? How do you grow the skill base? And now we've got the Pacific Labour Scheme.
Yeah.
And that can help Australia, but it might be at the economic distress of the Solomons, because you're taking skills out of there. I mean, I know they would repatriate, you know, income, but maybe it will help them long term. But you know, this needs to be balanced, because these countries need to come up the food, the food chain, and their debt to GDP is very high. In Fiji, it's over 90%. It's lower in the Solomons, but it's still high.
Yeah.
So it's a frustration for people looking at these places. It must be hugely frustrating for you.
Yeah.
And your competitors.
Yeah. So and I think many. And I think it's important to say this, many Solomon Islanders, even though in the economical lens, you know, we're considered a very poor country, but you go and talk with any Solomon Island and you ask them, do you see yourself as a poor country? And said, no, you know, I don't think the Solomon Islands,
different values.
yes. And here's the reason, you go to the Solomon Islands, you hardly see homeless people. You go to the Solomon Islands, even the aged care is taken care of within the community setting. I think the biggest issue in the Solomon Islands, as you've rightfully said, is maximization of their resources, but as well as corruption. If we can deal with corruption, Solomon Islands, PNG, the rest of the South Pacific can be, you know, big economical powerhouses. A friend of mine says, you know, instead of considering the island nations as small Pacific island nations, we should be considered as big ocean nations.
Big ocean.
Yes. So it changes, the perception of how we are viewed. And I think as a Solomon Island, it's good to view ourselves in that regard. Now, this Pacific Labour Scheme is a huge blessing. Realistically speaking, Solomon Islands' economy now is terrible. And I am even willing to dare to say now that without the Pacific Labour Scheme and the remittance that is going back, the Solomon Islands' economy is...
So there's about 2,000, or was it 4,000?
I think we have passed the 4,000 mark a couple of weeks
and that's going
ago.
up. That's
and
growing.
it is going up, and they are aiming to hit 5,000 by 2023.
And in total is about 8 to 10,000.
That's the aim.
Yes. In Australia. So those remittances are crucial.
It's massive.
Plus also the development of skills. And one of the things that's starting to happen is following those skills back and starting businesses, small business back in country. So that's an upside. So there could be some good things that come from this, and at least economic dignity. But what you talked about before with family and church and so on, the social fabric is stronger, so you don't have that sense of we're poor, because you've got other qualities. And we could learn a lot from that. You know, family is crucial. So I love what you're doing, and I mean, you're coming from a heart of loving your country. Right, so how can that be wrong? Why should you be arrested for that? but obviously the narrative is distorting, and as you said before. So let's track and see what happens with your journey. You have aspirations to be in politics. Is that what you're saying down the track?
Down the track, maybe one day. For this season, I don't think it's right for me. It's the right
They
time.
make a contribution in other ways and
Yes,
in ministry.
yes, and because,
And
yeah.
perhaps hook Australian ministries to go into Solomon's, following into some.
That's my biggest passion, and
Okay.
I'm a big advocate for that.
Right.
And I think many times the West has underestimated the power the church can play in the
Absolutely.
regions of the South Pacific.
Yeah.
There's a good collaboration between the Australian House of Prayer, for example, for All Nation, with Clean Water for Life.
Yes.
They have put in hundreds and hundreds of water wells.
Just a very basic thing like
Oh,
water.
basic. It's all throughout the Solomon Islands.
Mm.
My community, I grew up carrying water to the stream, and I'd avoid my mom looking for me every after school. Go get water, you know. And it's a lifetime thing. And then for the first time, when you see water coming out of a water pipe, it changes. It's a eureka moment, you know, for my village and my community. This is massive. And I believe Christians, they have more to play in collaboration. I'm not saying, you know, Christian, come to the Solomon, Christian Solomon need you. I'm talking collaboration.
Yeah.
I'm talking
Well,
partnership.
there's natural water and there's spiritual water.
Amen to that.
And get it flowing.
Yeah.
So Israel, thanks for being with us. Really good to hear your story, and please do keep us in touch. And if you'd like to connect with Israel and perhaps see how you can help with investment or donation or collaborating, as Israel's just been saying, do make contact. We'll put his details on the screen, how to get in contact, and let's see if we can help the Solomons and see you rise up, because it's a great nation. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken.
Sing amen.